Today, we're talking about the Schiit Tyr monoblocks versus the Emotiva A1 monoblocks. And we're also going to talk about the Schiit Freya N. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's have some fun comparing all this stuff together. If you are new here, consider subscribing. We have over 630 videos, amps, turntables, DACs, home theater, just about anything for anyone. And please like this video. Share it out if you'd like. Thank you. In the interest of brevity, we're going to try to power through this review because there's a lot to cover. We're talking about the Schiit Tyr. It is their new choke monoblock, a very powerful amplifiers. We're also talking about the Freya N, which is a different take on the Freya. It has different tubes than the Freya Plus and is obviously different than the Freya without the tubes. And then we're also going to compare the Tyrs to the much more affordable Emotiva A1s. So let's get started. The Tyr come in at a whopping 55 pounds a piece. They're also $1,600 a piece, which means you're buying two, because if you buy one, well, unless you're into mono music, they have a gain of 28 dB, very similar to the gain on the A1 monoblocks from Emotiva. They have a gain of 29 dB, and I could definitely hear a difference in that 1 dB of change. This amplifier uses continuity, and it also uses a big choke in it. I don't really understand what a choke is. If you do, stick it in the comments. I did look it up though, and it seemed like it had everything to do with guitar amps, of all things. All the info I found on choke amplifiers was in regards to guitar amps. I think it uses an inductor versus capacitors to do some magic in the amplification. Anyway, the takeaway here is this is done differently than most amplifiers are done. And that's really why it's heavier. It also has some huge heat sinks. On the front, it's pretty easy. You have either standby mode or play mode. These things are beautiful. Schiit products have always been beautiful. Industrial looking, very heavy, made out of metal, and you're not going to confuse these with other stuff from other manufacturers that may be traditionally distributed. Schiit, if you didn't know, is a direct-to-customer model, which means you're not buying it from a dealer. You're buying it from their website, and their website only. The Tyrs are made in California. 5-year warranty and 15-day satisfaction guarantee, which means if you get it and you don't like it within 15 days, you can return it. The Freya N, on the other hand, is actually on closeout. So if you want the Freya N, you have to go down to products, and then all the way to the bottom it says B stock and closeout. There are a few Freya N's left. And I wish that it would just be a regular product, because I really like the Freya N. I like it better than the Freya Plus. I don't particularly know why. It's almost identical with the exception of the tubes, but for whatever reason, I feel like it's got a little more heft on the bottom versus the Freya Plus. Operation on that's also pretty straightforward. 3 different types of preamp gain. There's a passive gain, then there's one that bypasses the tubes, and then there's one that engages the tubes. On the back you have 2 balanced inputs, a few single-ended inputs, a balanced output, and 2 single-ended outputs, which means if you only have a single-ended amp, that you can also run a subwoofer at the same time, because there's 2 single-ended outputs. You can also run a subwoofer just with speaker level inputs if you have to. So just because something doesn't have a subwoofer output on it doesn't mean you still can't hook up a subwoofer. But that's a different video. On the back of the Tyr, pretty straightforward again. You have a speaker output, which is only one. Then you have a balanced input or a single-ended input. And then there's a switch on the bottom to switch between, well, are you using balanced input or are you using single-ended inputs? And then you have a master power switch on the back. Beautiful, awesome, well-built. The Freya, very attractive, well-built. I think it used fairly common tubes, so if you want a tube roll, you certainly can. Power is on the back of the Freya. There's also only a couple of buttons. 3 buttons in particular. The volume control is ladder. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this. That's what it sounds like when you turn up the volume. Also comes with the standard Schiit remote control, which is made out of solid titanium steel alloy. Just kidding, I think it's aluminum. But it's nice. And it's magnetic. I could have just done, hold on, I gotta start my timer so it doesn't get too long. Casio G-Shock. If you don't have one of these, you should get them. They're inexpensive, solar power. These are great watches, man. Every time I put this on, it reminds me of being in the 80s or the 90s. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh, the comparison. I could have done, but I didn't, do just a video on the tiers. But what good would that do? We don't really know about a product until we compare it to a different product, oftentimes at the same price level. But I thought it would be cool, number one, because I don't have any other monoblocks that are similarly priced, but I thought it would be cool to compare them to the other monoblocks that I have in the house, which are the Emotiva A1s. For a source, I use, surprise, surprise, a Weem Pro, going into, surprise, surprise, a Geshelli Labs J2, the AKM version. I connected the J2 to the Freya via balanced outputs, so balanced inputs. Then I used both single-ended outputs on the Freya to go to not only the tiers, but the A1s, because the A1s don't have a balanced input. So I wanted to keep input voltage levels as closely as I could, because if you run balanced into one, single-ended into the other, you're going to have a big voltage variability because one is 4 volts and the other is 2 volts. So I try to keep it as level as I could and as easy as I could, because if you have a big differential in gain, it's going to sound a lot different. There still is a differential in gain, and I did hear a difference, but I was able to kind of wade through all that and kind of come up with a conclusion on how these amps are different. The tier is rated at a whopping 200 watts RMS into an 8 ohm load and 350 watts RMS into a 4 ohm load, which is very similar to the A1 specifications. It's rated at 200 watts into 8 ohms and 325s into 4 ohms. Similar gain settings, and they have similar power. That's a good comparison. I've been listening to the tiers for quite a while, and I don't want to spoil the surprise. Anyway, we'll get to that in the final thoughts. Been listening to it for a couple of weeks in the office here. So it's been my daily driving amplifier, daily drivers. I did my in-depth evaluation between the tiers and the A1s, and I used 3 different songs. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're doing this much intense listening, 3 songs is really all you need after you kind of know the amplifier pretty well. And I also used the Freya N on both of them so that there was no preamp difference, okay? Now, I know this is not scientific. It's the best that I can do. But you probably know what songs I used. Waffle by Seven Dust. If you haven't heard that song, man, it's a good song. There's harmonies, there's big bass hits, there's crunchy guitars. It's a wonderful song. Seven Dust, I think, is one of the most underrated metal bands. They're a lot of fun. I saw them last year in concert. Anyway, Seven Dust, Waffle, Over the Hills and Far Away by Led Zeppelin. Acoustic guitars, yumminess, the awesomeness that is Led Zeppelin. So that was the second song. The third song was Demonoid Phenomena by Rob Zombie. And I know that may cringe people when they hear that I listen to that song for evaluation, but there is a lot of stuff going on electronically that adds to the ambiance and it also adds to the soundstage. So that is a great track to test for soundstage purposes. Guess what? They sound great on both amps, but they did sound different. Final thoughts. Here we are already. Okay, so the easiest way I can describe it is the tiers seem like they have more bass going on. There was a slight differential in gain. And when I switched them back in, I used the one little switcher with the VU meters. I know it's not the best switcher in the world, but as long as I'm hearing differences, it means the switcher's doing its job. Anyway, there was more bass coming out of the tiers, and more control in the bass, and more clarity in the bass versus the A1s. Even with the delta in the gain, you would think that the A1s would pull in and give me more bass punch when I changed it out. What really happened is the vocals on the A1 went up slightly higher than the tiers, which tells me that that differential in gain, I'm hearing it in the vocals. If the bass sounds similar, as in quantity of bass, means that the tiers have more of it. And when I sat back and listened, because I did some quick A-B switching, what I really did was I listened to 30 seconds of one song on the tiers, 30 seconds of the other song on the A1s, and then I switched them up a little bit. And with the little tiny differential in gain, I was able to easily pick them out on quick A-B switching, not because of the huge sonic differences, but just because of that slight gain differential. But there is more bass detail and more bass quantity in the tiers. As far as acoustic guitars, vocals, they both sounded good. I would say that the tiers sound less veiled than the A1s. I'm not saying anything bad about the A1s. I think it's a great amplifier and is my reference amplifier. But you could just tell there was better instrument separation in the mid-range. The acoustic guitars seemed a little bit pluckier on the tiers. It just did a better job. Soundstage and imaging was also wider on the tiers and deeper. More of a immersive experience, larger experience with the tiers. And that's saying something because the A1s are really good. Really, really, really good. So are the tiers over twice as good as the A1s? Because the A1s come in at $500. That means for $1,000 you can get a pair of them, compared to the $3,200 that you'd be paying for a pair of the tiers. Tiers are better. They're not twice as good, but they are better in pretty much every category. And dare I say, the tiers remind me a little bit of my Mac 7270 power amp, which is a monster, and it has a certain personality. I think if you did comparisons between the Mac and some of the modern amplifiers, the Mac is probably going to lose on clarity and instrument separation, but the Mac has a personality. The Mac has a certain type of sound, caramelly, very engaging. The Autoformer amps, I think. Well, I've only heard one, but the tiers remind me of the Mac 7270, and I think that's important because people love Mac amps. I'm not saying it sounds exactly like the Mac, but it had the vibe, Mac vibes. Going back to the Freya N, $600 on closeout right now. If you're at all interested, I would buy one simply because I don't know if these things are ever coming back into normal production. And this is my favorite Freya preamp. And I've heard them all for the Freya Plus, and then the Freya N. I like this one the best. Didn't seem as thin. Great amp, great combo. I also took out the EQ that I had previously running in the chain because I just wanted to hear this for what it is. If I was keeping this system, I might add an EQ. I had one in there previously, but the more I listened, the more I got to know it, I didn't really feel like I needed an EQ, and I think it's because the tiers have that extra bass oomph, personality on the bottom. But who am I kidding? I'd probably still put an EQ in there. Anyway, if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/cheapaudioman. Every Sunday night, we have Patreon-only Zooms. Also, Patreon-only Discord, Patreon-only Facebook. You can sign up for Amazon Music, Tidal, or Roon. Links in the description. Click on the link. Even if you quit, I still get a couple of dollars. You can also use the links in the description. However, I do not have an affiliate relationship with Schiit. They did not pay me for this video. They just sent it out. And then I do the review. I love the folks over at Schiit. Denise, Jason, fantastic people, easy to do business with. And they have a facility in Corpus, which is cool because it's Texas. You can also use the thanks button down by the share button. Buy me a cup of coffee. But don't feel compelled to buy me anything. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. If you got the cash, get some tier monoblocks because they are awesome. And get you your Freya N, because it's awesome too. And then fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.